It's really delightful to be in the presence of so many people who think in interdisciplinary ways. And already, just listening to the various speakers, we've touched on things like robots and our relationships to them and our sense of self, evolution and different religious views of it, what is sacred, what are rights. And so it's appropriate that this week, as we're here, this is the 40th anniversary of our first moon landing. And it's a good time to both look back in order to look forward. And certainly over the past 4 or 5 decades for the space era, astrobiology and space exploration have broadened our views about many things: life itself, environments, relationships, permanence. And we're trying to understand them in a very large context, in an interdisciplinary context that includes asking questions about significance, scientific and otherwise, and meaning. Over the centuries, we're not the first ones to do that. People have been asking these questions about what is the nature of life, what is my world, what's the universe, what's my place in it. And we've been doing that for many, many millennia. The difference is that our generation is perhaps the first generation that can use science and technology to actually address the questions and perhaps answer them. And so we've seen great strides in our understanding, scientific understanding about the nature of life, about the environments around us, about our place in the universe, and that rate of information accrual is increasing very rapidly. So what I want to do today is give you a sense of some of the behind-the-scenes planning that goes on in astrobiology. Everyone looks and marvels at the space station or the shuttle or planned missions to the moon, but not so many realize that behind that is a very comprehensive set of scientific questions, a framework that has generated a field that really just emerged within the past decade, a very interdisciplinary field called astrobiology. And central to astrobiology are searches for extraterrestrial life. And in doing that search and doing the science, we come up against issues that involve more than just the science, planetary protection being one of them, being careful about cross-contamination when we go to other planets, which is required by a United Nations treaty. So we have learned a lot from the astrobiology science roadmap, and a group of us, it's been happening for a number of years, began asking, could you do something like they did? Imitation being the sincerest form of flattery, I think. Can we come up with a societal issues roadmap that would help us consider important research questions and have a sense of where we're going? And what I'm going to give you today is a workshop that we held just to do that, and the current status of our thinking and the kinds of questions that came up and what we see as the next steps. So first, the good news is I don't have to repeat all the wonderful information that Chris Impey gave us on astrobiology. Basically, astrobiology, it traces back to exobiology, and it's really our questions about, is there life out there? And within the past decade, it's gotten much, much more interdisciplinary, and the field of astrobiology emerged to pull together biology, chemistry, geology, paleontology, cosmology, and we now have a sense of how origin, evolution, distribution, and questions of future of life are connected. We didn't get there without a plan. For a long time, there were random scientists running around, as they always do, doing research projects. But actually, I don't know who came up with the first idea, but there was a thought, why don't we do a roadmap? And it was a multidisciplinary workshop that took place at NASA Ames in about 97, 98. And it was a systematic look at what do we know, and what are the important research questions that are still out there to be known, and can we link that research somehow with our action plans, our missions? And so that way link science and technology. It's kind of a strategic plan, but as you know, most research is done by individual researchers in universities or elsewhere, so there's a lot of academic freedom. Can you bring some focus to that without being very prescriptive? So astrobiology roadmap was developed in 1998. It's been revised twice since then. And astrobiology is really a very simple field when you look at it, despite all of its complexity. We are asking 3 main questions that relate to the study of the origin, evolution, distribution, and fate of life in the universe. The 3 questions are some that you are very familiar with. Where do we come from? How does life begin? and how does it evolve? Are we alone? Is this representative of life? Only life we know in the universe is here on Earth. Does life exist anyplace else? And can we detect it if it's there? And then the big question, which is unusual for a government-related plan, what's our future? For something to look to the future is a really unusual thing, especially within the government. We're asking what's the future of life on Earth and elsewhere. There's a wonderful book, and there's a website here that you could go to for additional information. Steve Dick is a historian who's done a lot of work on theology in the cosmos as well, so he's got a great view of things. Well, the roadmap itself was put together as an implementation plan. And basically what it said is there are multiple pathways for research, and we're asking how does it all hang together? What they came up with was 7 scientific goals that outlined broad domains of investigation. So they said, these are the areas. So I'm a biologist, and I don't do anything with star formation. And someone who's a paleontologist doesn't think about invasive species like I do, yet we're all into this together, so it's sort of a teamwork effect. These broad domains that we're looking at are on the order of 10 plus years, so these questions are big questions that are going to be with us for at least a decade or more. Questions were, understand the nature and distribution of habitable environments in the universe. Explore for habitable environments and for life in those places in the solar system, including on Earth. Understand how life might emerge. Determine, and that could be in a laboratory or out there. Determine how early Earth life interacted and evolved in its changing environment. Change is always a part of it. Understand the evolutionary mechanisms and environmental limits of life. Determine the principles that will shape the future of life. And another one, this last one is more of a methodological question. How do you recognize signature of life on other worlds and on Earth? I don't have to find ET walking across my photo screen. I can see a footprint, I can see a smoke signal, I can see a flashing mirror. All are evidence of life. So is a fossil, so is a biochemical molecule. That's something I associate with life. So we can look for evidence of all sorts. And what they did is took these 7 areas and then said, what are the high priority areas to move towards that? So as an example, in number 2, exploring for habitable environments, you might say, well, going to Mars is really good because we think it could be habitable because there's evidence of water up there. And oh, by the way, while you're at Mars, you could think about what are the Earth analog habitats that are like it? Antarctica, for instance. So you look in habitats on Earth to be studying things out there. Or searches for extrasolar planet. Let's see if there's other Earth-like planets that seem to have habitable conditions. So you can be addressing these with science from all different areas. Now, what was interesting about this roadmap process is they set up a group of operating principles. Truth be told, when they were first working on it, these were originally part of the goals. And the scientists basically said, we shouldn't spend money on these soft things. So they put them aside, but in the end, what happened is they made them as overarching principles, which I think in the long run makes them stronger. Astrobiology is multidisciplinary in content and interdisciplinary in implementation. It takes teamwork. Astrobiology encourages planetary stewardship, planetary protection, recognizes ethical issues associated with exploration. Look at this one. Astrobiology recognizes broad societal interest in its endeavors, especially in areas of trying to achieve greater understanding about life, searching for other biospheres, assessing societal implications for discovering extraterrestrial life, and envisioning our future. And also, astrobiology has and NASA has a very strong sense of the importance of communicating to the public because we're all in this together. Now, I've put a box around this one because it turns out there hasn't really been any way to turn those things into something that's implementable. So we can think about planetary protection, and I often give this slide of Columbus. When Columbus came to the New World, as we are going to our New World, Columbus didn't know about the germ theory of disease, and he and the early explorers had no idea that they were infecting Native Americans with things that would kill them. So when we go to other worlds, we need to build on the science we have to avoid past mistakes. Responsible exploration is what we want to do. So how do I take those issues about life and searching for life and turn them into something that I can implement? What do we do about research on the future of life? At this point, it's all hit or miss. Many of these issues go beyond science. And up until now, since the beginning of the space age and through the formation of the Outer Space Treaty, it's been the scientists and the engineers, often with lawyers as well, making policy, making decisions. And I can tell you from my perspective as a biologist in there, I'm very impressed at the quality of the decisions that were made. Biosafety, risk management, all of the things that you would want to have happen. But now we're getting to the point where some of the questions can't be addressed by science. So we're asking, how do we make decisions in those areas where we know we have to address? How do we know what's right? And how do we plot that course ahead? And can we organize all this information in a systematic way? The issues aren't just hypothetical. We're not just talking about what would it mean if I discover microbes on Mars. Take an example. Several years ago, the National Research Council had a study on forward contamination of Mars. Given the fact that we think there's much more probability of life on Mars because of the increased probability of liquid water, people were starting to say, well, what are the ethical considerations behind planetary protection policy? Are we stringent enough in case there really is life up there? And do we have to bring in more than just science? Because at this point, we're thinking about science. So the Outer Space Treaty is based on protecting science. It was passed at a time in '67 when we said no militarization of space. Space is a resource for humankind. Science takes the ascendant role. Those are great things. But now we're saying, maybe something else. Environmental ethics didn't come of being until around the '80s. So this treaty has a need to be looked at again. There is no policy for microbial extraterrestrial life if we discover it. If a rover discovered it next week, if we brought it back in samples, I don't know. We have done a protocol to say how you'd handle samples and quarantine them and keep people safe when you bring the rocks back, and we're only talking about bringing as much as you could fit in a coffee cup. But all of those decisions have been made on biosafety and science and communicating openly with the public. Questions of second genesis, don't know what we do with them. How do we relate to life that is different than us biochemically? And we'd have the ability to show that. Right now, we're in the middle of a real push for lunar exploration, and Google has put up an X Prize, much like Lindbergh and the early aviators had prizes. This one is a $30 million prize for the first private sector enterprise to go to the moon, land safely, rove 500 meters, and send back a broadcast. And if you go to an Apollo site and can document either an Apollo or a Russian site, a human site, they'll give you another $5 million. So that sounds great, but what are the regulations? What if somebody drives their rover over and rips off a piece of an Apollo module? What if somebody found Alan Shepard's golf ball and brought it back and put it on eBay? I mean, I'm just being silly, but the point is we have regulations that deal with planetary protection, but we don't have any environmental regulations. It's a resource for humankind. So we can look at the Outer Space Treaty and then look at the Antarctic Treaty. We treat Antarctica as a resource for humankind. There's a need for some comparative work to look at it. And then there are also, as we talk about long-duration human missions, there are some very, very serious questions about informed consent, humans as experimental subjects. What does it mean that we have colonies up there that are, as we are obligated on Earth to keep them going? So there's all sorts of questions that go beyond just the science. So what we did is convened a workshop in February of this year. We adopted the astrobiology roadmap process and its iterative framework, and also some of the workshop approaches we used for Mars workshops. You basically get 30 to 40 really smart people, put them in a room for 2.5 days, and then you make it multidisciplinary. In this case, we had astrobiologists plus lawyers, ethicists, theologians, anthropologists, psychologists, social scientists, humanities people, artists, communicators, and educators. It was a great bunch. And we first discussed, what would our framework be? We decided the framework should be the same. We're asking questions about origin and evolution of life, we're asking if we're alone, and we're asking about future of life. And we said, well, there's sort of 3 themes we want to break it down because we ended up talking in circles for too long. So we felt science and religion was one important theme, philosophy and ethics and definitional things, another theme, and then social sciences and humanities, another theme. And in each of the questions we took on, we thought about what is the content of astrobiology and our future discoveries, and how would it affect different parts of culture? What is the meaning of what we're finding? How does it affect relationships? What does it do to values? And what does it do to our behavioral trajectory? So the initial decisions also were to look at, we decided it wouldn't be just a United States or NASA-focused document. We said that it would be international, and we said that it would be inclusive of all the things in the astrobiology roadmap, but that's pretty concentrated on just the solar system. So we said we want to include SETI research, finding extraterrestrial intelligence. We wanted to think about planetary defense. Should we do something to prevent asteroids from wiping out Earth? We thought private sector activity should be a part of it, and space debris and anything else that came up. So we wanted to be really inclusive. We came up with 5 main goals. How does life begin and evolve? And questions on the significance and meaning of life. Relationships. We needed to study relationships on Earth in order to then be able to say something about relationships with other worlds or our future. So if you look at it here, A, B, and C are things where there's plenty of research. It's what you guys all do. We don't have to go and reinvent the wheel. We need to go and organize it and systematically then address it towards the D and E. Another way to look at it is this. We've got A, B, and C are all things where we have baseline fundamental information that we could kind of look at in a different way through a different organizing filter. That would feed forward to discussing relationships with other, and I would say that other also could include thinking about nanotechnology, robots, synthetic biology, and life's future with other worlds. So I don't go through all of the details, but goal A is exploring the range and complexity of societal issues associated with origin and evolution of life. We know that religious and cultural groups have issues with that. We want to examine the kinds of religious, ethical, legal, cultural, and other concerns arising from that scientific research that we're doing in astrobiology and ask, what does it say? And part of it is clarifying definitions about our understanding of life, thinking about value, self versus other, understanding the range of views in organized religions and cultures, and compare what it would mean to have a cosmic view of the world, a biological view, a cultural view. Understand different ways of knowing. We are the scientists, and we're imposing a very Western, very scientifically driven view. What would it look like to others, and can we talk about it? And we need to bring up the issue of second genesis. If we find life and show that it's distinctly different than life as we know it, that really requires all of us to talk together. And in that case, we also have to think about the educational implications of that, as well as legal and policy and private sector concerns, ownership, uses. So next one, goal B, understanding how astrobiology relates to questions of significance and meaning. There's life out there. We think there's more than one example of life out there. And what would it mean to all of us if we would find life someplace else? We need to recalibrate our thinking about life by examining and perhaps expanding definitions of life. And don't just wait for it to happen, but proactively think about it now. The astrobiology community should encourage and expand dialogue with folks like you to start bringing in those ethical and cultural implications. Link astrobiology discussions with the extensive literature research that's already out there and thinking about other life. And start to think about ethically right activities on bodies with and without life. Should we treat the moon the same way as we do Mars? Moon doesn't have life. Maybe we can go there and do what we want. If Mars has Martians, maybe we shouldn't go there. So lots of things come up. So we also want to think about different scenarios for how you discover extraterrestrial life. I could discover it in a glove box on home, here on Earth. I could discover it with an astronaut holding it on Mars, or a rover could discover it. Each one of those would require different protocols. Examine relations of humans with Earth, its life, and environments. That's what we were talking about today. What are the full range of relationships with different types of life? What is personhood? What is self? What's the definitions? And we want to move beyond anecdotal evidence of how different groups may respond to other and do an in-depth systematic review of things. So we might also want to examine how moral constraints apply to different methods of exploration: imperialism, colonization, manifest destiny, the prime directive. Who should make decisions about which one of these would work? And we should think about how we're going to put ethical considerations into science research as well. And then in the whole area of planetary protection, there are many societal policy issues that we have to deal with already, and think about other technologies as well. Then we get to goal D, which is where the real fun starts. What's our relationship with other when we find it? At this goal, we're assuming A, B, and C, we were assuming we'll do that now. We'll do that now. D is sort of in the months, if we found life tomorrow, in the months and years following, we've got big issues. We want to consider the scenarios, think about what the life might be. How do you think about values, views, impact on social structures? How do you address questions of rights and obligations and impacts? And we can learn a lot by studying historical analogs. We've had many examples of contact with other through history. How have those played out? What can we learn from them? How can we look forward? And so there's just sort of a brainstorming in general. And then we get to the final goal, the future of life, life's collective future. And that means thinking about three perspectives: the fate of humanity here on Earth and all life on Earth, the future of our terrestrial life if it would go beyond Earth. We could have speciation. What happens when you have two different species of humans? And the fate of extraterrestrial life. We could have an impact on it just as much as vice versa. And we have to think about it in its native habitat and its transplanted habitat. So you can see there's a lot of implications of the different trajectories, and we've got to think about the fact that we are sort of moving towards a preferred or deliberate evolutionary trajectory, which is different than a, quote, natural one. How do different traditions and religions feel about that? Is it okay to intervene in things in a deliberate way? Do we have a responsibility to intervene and stop an asteroid from coming? Should we spend a certain amount of money? Should we terraform? Spreading life is a great thing. What if we spread life to other planets? Should we do that? How much money is that going to take? And should we spend that money? It's a social justice issue. Should we spend that money and use that money that could be used for people on Earth? And will religious structures migrate with humans? Well, different cultures and traditions have different ways of accommodating the new views. So where we are right now is the workshop report is underway, and we're going to put it up on a website and get public comment. The roadmap itself is still kind of being teased into life. We still need to prioritize. Now we've got those big goals. We want to take all those questions and figure out which ones are the ones that are really important, and find out if there's any gaps. And we're going to try to do it like the astrobiology science roadmap. It's a framework that encourages transdisciplinary investigation. We want to encourage new research and novel collaborations. So if you've never thought about, as an anthropologist, about looking forward instead of backwards for your case examples, we got it. We want to make this a living draft. It's not set in stone. It doesn't belong to anybody. It belongs to everybody, and we can change it with public comment. And we already see that the information is needed on things like discussing planetary protection, thinking about ethics in planetary environments, thinking about private sector uses in space. So we're already beginning to disseminate information. This is the first Metanexus conference. When we put in the proposal, we were still in the midst of the workshop. Mm-hmm. We've also done International Space University. We've got some meetings coming up, including an International United Nations treaty where they'll talk about planetary protection. And so what we're doing is we're trying to get word out through conferences and have sessions. And we don't think this is going to stop anything. It's kind of a yellow light. We're saying we could find life out there, and if you don't know the road you're going to take, who knows where you're going to end up. So let's make a roadmap and try to work together. That's it. I'd be happy to answer questions.